And next up, we have David Handwerk, who is the chief with the Economic Formulation Section with also the Army Corps of Engineers, but this time the Chicago District. So thank you for being here, David, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Veronica. So yes, so I'm Dave Handwerk with the Corps of Engineers in Chicago. So I kind of lead our Economic Formulation Section within planning. We basically have two sections there. I lead the one where the primary driver is your economic type issues. We also have an environmental formulations section that handles more of the ecosystem type projects. So I've got three buckets here. This is going to be a little more tactical. I want to talk a little bit about just some general background about the Corps of Engineers and what we do with regard to the Great Lakes shoreline. Talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing out there in the field, and then finally wrap up with some of the things that we are doing about them. So next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So basically within the Corps, there are three Great Lakes districts. Detroit District handles all that Great Lakes forecasting, and John and his crew do an amazing job of that. It's really difficult modeling exercises, and they get a lot of input from a lot of folks. Detroit also handles shoreline work within the state of Michigan and parts of northern Wisconsin. We also have our Buffalo District. Buffalo handles the shoreline in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, basically Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And then finally in Chicago, we have Illinois, Indiana, and the shoreline of Wisconsin, basically south of Menominee. So basically that the vast majority of the Lake Michigan shoreline there. We also operate and maintain 21 federal harbors as well as the Chicago Lock. Regarding shoreline work, we basically plan, design, and construct shoreline protection works as authorized. So basically everything the Corps does, we have to be authorized by Congress to do, and then we have to get funding each year. So our funding comes in year by year, project by project. We also do technical assistance and some emergency response, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. There we go. So I mentioned before that everything we do is authorized by Congress. There's a bunch of different pieces of legislation that govern what we can and cannot do. We have a couple of authorities that are called continuing authorities, where Congress has delegated the ability to make decisions and implement projects to the Chief of Engineers in Washington without having to go back to them. So Section 14 is more erosion protection type work. Section 103 is more beach erosion type projects. So those, we get some funding each year to do that on a national level. We also have a number of authorities doing ecosystem restoration, similar type thing, typically smaller type projects, where we have the ability within the Corps of Engineers to make the vast majority of the decisions. So those continuing authority projects are great because they can address some of those smaller projects, maybe a little bit faster than our traditional ones. The downside of them is that they are highly competitive nationally. So there's a limited amount of budget that we get each year. I think Section 14 in 2021, we got something like a little over $8 million nationally, divided up amongst 50 states. So you see some of the challenges there of implementing some of those continuing authority projects. We also have some emergency management authorities, one of which is called advanced measures that we've used on occasion. Those are really geared for more flooding related projects. We've been able to use those on occasion, especially back in the 80s, we had a few of those. Those are also a little bit tricky because we need basically a state disaster declarations. We actually need a letter from the governor saying that they have exhausted their ability to respond to a flooding emergency. And then finally, we have what are called specifically authorized projects. Those tend to be larger ones. They take longer to implement, and there's a lot of back and forth with Congress on that. And a good example of that is the Chicago Shoreline Protection Project. Can you move next slide, please? So here's some of the things that we're seeing in just a few slides. Number one, we're seeing some beach loss. So there's a couple different flavors of this. Number one, we see long-term erosion, and this is more of a natural process. What we see there is some work that we've done looking at Illinois Beach State Park over the decades. You see that the beach area has eroded. That's a kind of a natural littoral drift process. When we have high lake levels, you can see larger losses of beach than more from inundation. So beaches typically have a relatively flat slope. So for every foot of rise in elevation, you typically see a horizontal distance of somewhere between 20 and 50 feet on average. It varies a lot. So obviously, if you had a flat beach that's a 1:50 slope, and you have 2 feet of rise, you've just lost 100 feet of your beach just due to natural inundation. The high lake levels also can exacerbate beach loss, just having a higher energy hitting the beaches and eroding away. And solving those problems is a little bit costly and complicated to implement at times. So you can do beach renourishment, you can do some structures on the lake physically to try to trap some of the sand that's moving by, but obviously you can have some downstream impacts on that. Next slide, please. There we go. So one of the other things that we're seeing, these are maybe a little bit more dramatic, is erosion. So there's a lot of different places that we've looked at on Lake Michigan particularly, especially when we see there's some older structures that have been out there for decades that survived pretty well when the lakes were lower, but now we have a little bit higher energy wave actions and the higher lake levels, and we can see some pretty dramatic erosion happening. Some of the old shoreline protections, especially in the Chicago area, historically had timber cribbing. So basically you had timber piles that were supporting a lot of the historic structures that were built there. Low lake level periods, it tended to have some rot issues and cause some collapse. We also see some places where just the stone sizing is just not up to the task. So that gets overwhelmed and you start seeing some pretty dramatic ones here. So the picture there is Kenosha, Wisconsin, where their stone sizing kind of wasn't adequate to the task, and we saw some pretty dramatic losses of land during just a few events. We probably lost about 40, 50 feet of bluff there once the revetment failed and the waves were able to attack more of the sandy bluff areas. And it's really important because there's a lot of critical infrastructure, as a lot of us know, right adjacent to the shoreline. So in Kenosha, that structure in the background is actually their wastewater treatment plant, which is really the only treatment plant for about 100,000 people. So they've actually had to go in there and do some emergency stone placement in order to save their treatment facility. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we're seeing, this is a little bit more of a hidden one, where we're seeing some more flooding type impacts. A couple different flavors. The one that we'll see pretty typical during an event is more shoreline related flooding, where you're seeing water coming over the top of revetments, either as clear water going over the top or just splash, and then causing some real localized flooding within a short distance from the shoreline. There's a lot of rivers that discharge into the Great Lakes. When you have that higher lake level, it causes a higher tailwater condition. And then when you add on to that a major precipitation event, it can cause some increased flooding beyond what we normally see. So some of the pictures here, looking at an event in May of 2020, the Chicago River, as people know, our emergency backup before we start flooding downtown is we open the gates to the Chicago River. During that event in May, we were seeing that the lake levels are at or near the river level. So we were not getting effective flow out of there. And we saw a little bit of near-term damage in the Chicago area due to, in part, the high lake levels kind of exacerbated by the precipitation event that we had in May. Next, please. Next slide, please. There we go. So some of the things that we're doing, so emergency response, so we activated our Emergency Operations Center back in July of 2019. I think the other two core districts are right around that same time. So far we've done 52 separate technical assistance requests. So that's a program under our emergency operations authorities where we can go in and provide some technical assistance to local municipalities for flooding or erosion issues. So we'll go out and do an inspection, provide some information on probable causes and recommendations for solving the problem. It's not one that brings a lot of money to the table in terms of construction, but we bring our technical expertise to the locals. So we're currently working on 22 additional technical assistance requests that we got from the city of Chicago, and that work is going to be kicking off here. Actually, I think next week it might be out there. We also did 5 Section 14 requests. That's that one, that continuing authorities program for doing shoreline protection work within the Corps, primarily in the Wisconsin area for those Section 14s. So one of the things we're showing there is one of the Section 14s that we're at in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The picture on the right is the problem that they're seeing of erosion along one of their roads. The bigger problem is that that manhole that you're seeing there, that's actually a valve box to a 48-inch potable water supply line that runs right alongside that road there. And you can see it was getting endangered. We were starting to see some potential loss of that water supply that supplies about 80,000 people in central Brown County. The picture there on the left is really the revetment that they've had to implement here over the last several months to protect their water supply. Next, please. And then Chicago Shorelines, this is the big project that we've done over a long period of time, a little over 9 miles of shoreline involved in this one. This is a specifically authorized project that we partnered with the Chicago Park District and the City of Chicago. Almost all of that's been completed with a couple of exceptions where we're still kind of working at the details. Morgan Shoals and Promontory Point are the two that are still remaining. We actually did some emergency response on the Morgan Shoals area using that authority to try to protect that area on the south side of Chicago. A little over $500 million total project cost has been implemented so far, and that project's been working out pretty good for the city of Chicago. We are looking at possibly doing a reevaluation report. I know there's a request into Congress from the city to relook at some areas that were not identified for implementation under the original project. Next, please. And finally, we do inspection of all of our completed projects, especially now with the high lake levels. We've been out there a little more actively looking at some of the projects. It's just a list of a bunch of them that we've out there. Some of these, the picture I took here are two that I actually worked on back in the late 80s. They seem to be holding up pretty well. We're seeing a little bit of backshore erosion behind the revetment, but overall, those projects have been holding up really well. Structurally, we are seeing a little bit of splash and wave overtopping, but so far we have not been seeing major flooding damage from behind those. And like I said, they've been holding up very well structurally. Next, please. So some potential future studies that we're working on, the Great Lakes Geomorphic Index, the coastal resiliency, and I already mentioned that shoreline potential for a reevaluation study. Let's go to the next one here for the geomorphic. Next slide, please. So the Geomorphic Index is a real large joint effort with the Corps, USGS, and NOAA. It's really focused on Lake Michigan, and it's trying to build an overall geospatial data set for the nearshore features and have a better understanding of how those features relate to coastline erosion and looking at some features that are most likely to minimize the erosion in the future. So that one, right now, we are looking at having that work done in 2021, depending on funding. Next, please. Next one is the coastal resiliency study. So this is a real high-level overarching study of all of the Great Lakes, looking to develop an overall watershed plan to identify some vulnerable areas and provide some risk-based decision-making tools. So this one would be a collaborative effort of the 3 core districts. Will involve our research lab. So the Corps actually operates several engineering research laboratories in the U.S. We have a partnership that we've been working on with the 8 Great Lakes states and several other federal agencies, NOAA, USGS, EPA, and FEMA. And this one, we are awaiting funding. I think we've had it scoped out. There's a lot of support from the various Great Lakes states. Each state obviously has their own priorities. So one of the challenges there is going to be getting everybody to work together, but we think we can do that one. But again, this one is and has been for a while awaiting some funding from Congress. Next, please. All right, I think I ripped through that fairly quickly. Be happy to answer any questions. My contact information is there. Let's see what we got.
All right, thanks. We did have one question or rather comment come in, and this is Jim Anderson. He said, loss of irreplaceable natural lake plain habitat that cannot be restored at Illinois Beach State Park. Need a solution even though it's costly. And then Vidya, who's with the Illinois Coastal Management Program, responded with some info, but I wasn't sure if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think I agree with those. Illinois Beach State Park has been a long-term problem out there. It is an expensive problem. I know we've done some studies on that, but I don't believe we have too much actively going on at the moment.